Flying saucers are real. They are not manufactured by any people that we know of on this planet. The people associated with them appear to be able to use the same laws of physics that we know, but in a much more advanced way. We have found that they use magnetism as a propulsion method, and that they are able to manipulate time and space in ways that we are only beginning to understand. The evidence is overwhelming, and the implications are staggering. This is a quote from Wilbert B. Smith in a Project Magnet report from 1953. The Cold War was more than a standoff between superpowers. It was a global shift in how nations operated. In the years after World War II, fear and secrecy became standard policy. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a race for nuclear dominance, and every scientific breakthrough carried military weight. Intelligence agencies expanded, surveillance intensified, citizens were told to prepare for fallout, while governments quietly prepared for something else. The year is 1950. The Cold War is tightening its grip on global politics, nuclear secrets are currency, and paranoia runs deep. Governments are watching the skies, not for Soviet missiles, but for something stranger. Reports of unidentified flying objects are surfacing across North America. Pilots, radar operators, and civilians describe crafts that move too fast, too quietly, too precisely to be explained by known technology. The sightings aren't dismissed, they are documented. And in Canada, one government scientist is paying very close attention. Wilbert Smith was born in Lethbridge, Alberta in 1910. He grew up in a country where radio was still a novelty, and long-distance communications was measured in cracking Morse code. From a young age, Smith was drawn to the invisible forces that moved through airwaves, signals, frequencies. He wasn't chasing mystery, he was chasing precision. He studied electric engineering at the University of British Columbia, graduating with a sharp mind and practical skill set. By the late 1930s, he was working as a chief engineer for CJOR, a radio station in Vancouver. His work wasn't glamorous, but it was foundational. He helped shape Canada's wartime monitoring systems, designing equipment that could detect and interpret signals with accuracy. Smith was methodical. He believed in measurements, calibrations, and repeatable results. But he also had a quiet curiosity about the edges of known science. He was particularly interested in geomagnetism, the study of Earth's magnetic field, and how it might be harnessed for energy or communication. By 1939, he had joined the Federal Department of Transport, where he worked in the broadcast and measurement section. His job was to ensure reliability in Canada's radio infrastructure. He was respected, not flashy, a man of equations, not headlines. In private, he kept notebooks filled with calculations and sketches. He was busy chasing patterns, not fame. And in the late 1940s, Smith came across a magazine article that caught his attention. It wasn't about radios or geomagnetism or anything he was formally trained in. It was about flying saucers. The article described strange objects seen in the skies, metallic, silent, fast-moving. Smith didn't dismiss it, he didn't laugh, he read it again. Something about the descriptions reminded him of the magnetic theories he'd been exploring, and he began to wonder, if these objects were real, could they be using principles that mainstream science has yet to grasp? He started collecting reports, not officially, just clippings, notes, eyewitness accounts. He looked for patterns, locations, time, weather conditions. He wasn't interested in the speculations, he was collecting data. By the 1950s, Smith had attended a conference in Washington, D.C., hosted by the North American Radio Broadcast Association. It was a routine trip meant to discuss frequencies, allocations, and technical standards. But while there, he had a private conversation with American officials, people who, he later claimed, confirmed that flying saucer phenomenon was real and classified at the highest levels. Smith returned to Ottawa changed. He didn't talk about it publicly, but in his notebooks, the questions shifted. He was no longer asking about magnetic fields and how they could improve radio transmissions. He was asking whether they could explain the movement of objects that defied conventional aerodynamics. He didn't call it UFO research, not yet, but the lines between geomagnetism and the unexplained had definitely started to blur. In November 1950, Smith submitted a formal proposal to the Department of Transportation. It was framed as a study of geomagnetic energy. There was no mention of flying saucers. The language was technical, cautious, and designed to pass through government channels without raising alarms. The proposal was accepted, and on December 2nd, Project Magnet was officially approved. Smith was given access to laboratory space, equipment, and personnel. The Defense Research Board and the National Research Council offered quiet support. The project operated out of the broadcast and measurement section where Smith already held senior positions. It was a modest operation, but it had clearance and backing. He began collecting data, magnetic readings, atmospheric conditions, radiation levels. He installed instruments to detect anomalies. He believed that if these objects were real, they might be interacting with Earth's magnetic field in measurable ways. In June of 1952, Smith issued a preliminary report. It was not widely circulated, but in it he stated, "We are not alone. The universe is populated with intelligent beings who are far more advanced than we are. These beings have been observing us and, in some cases, have made contact. Their technology operates on principles we are only beginning to understand, particularly in the fields of magnetism and mental phenomenon. They are not hostile, but they are curious. There appears to be a cosmic law that prevents them from interfering directly in our affairs." He believed the objects were not just technological. He believed that they were operated by intelligent entities. He also believed that magnetism was the key to understanding their propulsion. Around the same time, the United States Air Force was running Project Blue Book. It was a larger program focused on cataloging sightings and analyzing reports. Blue Book had military oversight and public visibility. Magnet did not. But both projects were chasing the same question. What were these objects? Where did they come from? And how did they move? Smith had contacts in Washington. He knew about Blue Book, and he suspected that the Americans had recovered physical evidence. He claimed to have seen fragments himself, loaned to him briefly by a classified group. He never mentioned the name, and when asked if it was the CIA, he said, "I'm sorry, gentlemen, but I don't care to go beyond that point." Project Magnet quietly continued. Smith kept measuring, observing, and writing. He believed the answers were close. He believed the technology was real, and he believed it was only a matter of time before the truth would surface. Smith believed that reality was structured by a set of universal laws. These weren't abstract philosophies. He treated them as operational principles, rules that applied to everything from atomic particles to human thought. The first was the law of order. Smith believed that the universe was not random. Every system, every interaction followed a pattern. He saw order not just in physics, but in behavior, in thought, in evaluation. To him, disorder was a temporary condition, something that resolved itself as systems returned to balance. Next was the law of balance. Smith argued that all forces seek equilibrium, whether magnetic fields, emotional states, or social systems. He believed that imbalance created tension, and tension drove change. He saw this law as central to understanding energy flow and even interpersonal dynamics. Then there's the law of progression. Smith believed that all systems move forward. He didn't mean technological advancement. He meant a deeper kind of development, an unfolding of potential. He saw progression in the growth of ideas, in the refinement of consciousness, and in the evolution of civilizations. Finally, there was the law of intelligence. Smith believed that intelligence was not just a trait of living beings. He saw it as a fundamental force, something that shaped matter, guided energy, and structured reality. He suggested that intelligence could exist independently of biology, and that it might be measurable in ways science has not yet discovered. He didn't separate these laws from his technical work. He believed they were all a part of the same system. When he studied magnetic fields, he was looking for order. When he analyzed anomalies, he was looking for balance. When he explored consciousness, he was looking for progression. And when he considered the possibility of contact, he was looking for intelligence. Smith's colleagues didn't always know what to make of these ideas. Some dismissed them, others listened quietly, but Smith kept writing and kept speaking and kept searching. He believed the laws were real. He believed that they were discoverable, and he believed that they were the key to understanding everything, from the smallest particle to the largest mystery. Smith believed that unidentified flying objects were not just physical machines. He believed that they were part of a larger system, one that operated according to the laws of magnetism, intelligence, and progression, and he wanted to test this scientifically. He began setting up equipment to detect anomalies. Magnetic meters, galvanometers, gamma-ray detectors, and radio receivers were installed in the Department of Transport facilities. These instruments ran continuously, recording environmental fluctuations. Smith believed that if these objects were real, they might leave behind measurable traces. He launched balloons into the night sky to test witness accuracy. He collected sighting reports. He compared them to instrument readings. He looked for the correlation between magnetic disturbances and visual sightings. In April of 1952, Smith was invited to join a newly formed committee known as Project Second Story. It was sponsored by Canada's Defence Research Board and composed of scientists, military officers, and technical experts from various government agencies. The group met periodically to review and discuss reports of flying saucers. Unlike Project Magnet, which was focused on field measurements and magnetic theory, Project Second Story was designed to collect, catalog, and correlate sighting data. It operated more like an internal review board, gathering reports from across Canada and attempting to identify patterns or explanations. Smith served as a key contributor. He brought data from his own investigations, including magnetic ratings and witness accounts. He believed the sightings pointed to intelligent control and advanced propulsion systems. He argued that the objects were not conventional aircrafts and that their behavior suggested a technology beyond our known capabilities. The committee was cautious. Many members were skeptical of Smith's conclusions. They reviewed the reports but rarely endorsed any specific interpretation. The group didn't release public findings, and its existence remained largely unknown outside government circles. In 1953, Smith moved his research to a borrowed facility at Shirley's Bay, a restricted site on the Ottawa River. It was remote, quiet, and shielded from interference. The location gave him the space to install sensitive equipment and monitor environmental conditions without any interruption. He brought in magnetometers to track fluctuations in the Earth's magnetic field. A gamma-ray detector was added to measure bursts of radiation, and a gravimeter was installed to detect shifts in gravity. He also set up a powerful radio receiver to monitor high-frequency signals. Each instrument was calibrated to detect anomalies that might suggest the presence of an unknown object. Smith didn't expect dramatic results. He was looking for subtle changes, brief deflections, unexplained spikes, patterns that couldn't be traced to known sources. He believed that if these objects were interacting with Earth's magnetic envelope, the instruments would catch it. On August 8, 1954, the graviometer registered a sharp deflection at 3:01 p.m. The reading was large and sudden. Smith and his team rushed outside. The sky was overcast, nothing was visible, but the data was clear. Something had passed through the field. 2 days later, the Department of Transport issued a public statement. They confirmed that UFO research had been underway for 3.5 years. They acknowledged the considerable data that had been collected, but they didn't offer conclusions. The press took notice. Questions were asked, denials followed, but the Shirley's Bay Observatory had already become a focal point. Something unusual was happening there, and Smith was at the center of it. He continued his work even as official support began to fade. He believed the instruments were doing their job. He believed the readings meant something, and he believed that the answers were close. By the mid-1950s, word of Smith's research had begun to spread. The press caught wind of the activities at Shirley's Bay, and the reaction was mixed. Some members of the public were intrigued. Others were skeptical. Within the scientific community, the response was sharper. Physicists and engineers questioned Smith's methodology. They argued that his conclusions were speculative, that his data was inconclusive, and that his metaphysical claims had no place in government research. Government officials grew uneasy. Smith's statements about contact and consciousness were seen as a liability. One internal memo described his work as embarrassing. Another warned that continued association with his theories could damage the credibility of the department. Smith didn't back down. He claimed to have received messages through mental impressions. He spoke of intelligence operating beyond the physical. He believed the contact was real. He believed the information he received was consistent with the universal laws that he had outlined. He also claimed to have examined recovered material. In one interview, he said, "I was lent a piece of a flying saucer. I showed it to Rear Admiral H.B. Knowles. When asked if I returned it to the Air Force, I said, not the Air Force, much higher than that." On August 8, 1954, the gravimeter at Shirley's Bay registered a sharp deflection. Smith called it a major disturbance. The sky was overcast, no visual confirmation was possible. But the instruments had reacted. And 2 days later, the Department of Transport announced Project Magnet was being shut down. The timing raised questions. The announcement came just after the most significant evidence recorded by the observatory. Smith believed the data was meaningful. Others believed it was mere coincidence. The official explanation was that the project had run its course. No further funding would be provided. Inside the department, concerns had been building. Smith's public statements about contact and consciousness were seen as problematic. His metaphysical writings were viewed as skepticism. Some officials worried that his work was drifting too far from accepted science, and others feared that continued association with his theories could be damaging to the department's credibility. Mainstream scientists criticized the project. They argued that Smith's conclusions were speculative and that his methods lacked rigor. The gravimeter spike was dismissed by some as an equipment malfunction, and others suggested it was caused by a natural fluctuation. Rumors persisted. Some believed that the project had uncovered something significant. There were claims that the data had been passed on to classified groups. In later years, Smith suggested that the shutdown was not the end of the research. He believed that the work had continued, just not in public view. He said, "The project was officially terminated, but the investigation didn't stop. It simply moved on to a different level." No documents confirm this, no officials acknowledge it, but the sudden closure, the timing, and the silence that followed left many wondering what had really happened at Shirley's Bay. After the shutdown of Project Magnet, Smith continued his work quietly. He gave lectures, wrote papers, and corresponded with researchers. He believed the phenomenon he had studied were part of a larger system, one that included consciousness, energy, and intelligence. He never stopped searching. In his final years, Smith's health began to decline. He remained active, still writing and speaking, but the pace slowed. He continued to advocate for new kinds of science, ones that embraced both physical measurements and metaphysical understanding. He passed away on December 27, 1962, at the age of 52. His death was not widely reported. There were no official tributes, no government statements, but among those who had followed his work, the loss was felt deeply. And after his death, his work didn't just disappear. It circulated quietly among researchers and independent investigators. His writings, especially his book, The New Science, was passed hand to hand. His ideas about universal law, magnetic propulsion, and consciousness were seen by some as visionary and by others as fringe. He had become a foundational figure in Canadian ufology. His name appeared in early newsletters, conference programs, and in private correspondences. Researchers cited his work when discussing magnetic anomalies and contact experiences. His blend of engineering and metaphysics gave others permission to explore the subjects from multiple angles. In the United States, Smith was recognized by groups like NICAP, the National Investigation Committee on Aerial Phenomenon. He was listed as a founding member. His technical background gave him credibility, even as his metaphysical claims drew criticism. Some investigators were drawn to his claim that intelligence itself was a measurable force. Others focused on his statements about recovered material and classified groups. His quote about returning a fragment to someone much higher than the Air Force became a point of speculation. Researchers asked who he meant. Smith never said. His influence extended beyond the 1960s. Later authors cited him in books and articles. His ideas appeared in publications like Flying Saucer Review and Fate magazine. His name was mentioned in discussions about consciousness, energy fields, and non-local communication. Mainstream scientists continued to dismiss his work. Government agencies distanced themselves. But among independent researchers, Smith remained a respected figure. He had worked inside the system. He had asked difficult questions. He had refused to stop when the answers didn't fit the expected model. His legacy was not built on proof. It was built on persistence. Project Magnet was never a large program. It had no public budget, no formal announcements, and no permanent staff. But its existence marked a rare moment when a national government openly investigated unidentified flying objects using scientific instruments and official resources. It is remembered as a quiet anomaly in Canadian history, an official inquiry into the unknown, not led by a committee but by one man with a slide rule, a conviction, a willingness to ask the questions others wouldn't. And although the Canadian government never released a final report, the project remains one of the earliest state-backed UFO investigations in North America. It's often mentioned alongside the U.S. Project Blue Book and the UK's Flying Saucer Working Party. But unlike those, Magnet was shaped by Smith's unique blend of engineering, metaphysics, and curiosity. In official circles, the project faded quietly, but among researchers and historians, it endures as a symbol of scientific courage, the kind that dares to measure the immeasurable. Wilbert Smith once said, "The existence of a different technology is borne out by the investigations which are being carried on at the present time in relation to flying saucers." To Smith, UFOs weren't just a mysterious object in the sky. They were clues to a deeper understanding of physics, energy, and perhaps even consciousness. His legacy lives on not in government agencies and archives, but in the minds of those who continue to ask, what if he was right?
Hey, he's Kian.
And she's Em.
And together we're the hosts of Do You Dare? So, Do You Dare is our podcast where we discuss all things true crime,
All things paranormal,
and all things history, mystery, and beyond.
plus don't forget the aliens.
Oh, that's silly of me. How could I forget those?
We're just two British siblings with mics, hoping to bring some spooky, some twisted, and some downright sinister to your ears.
If you like what you're listening to right now, type in Do You Dare into wherever you get your podcasts and join us as we delve into all things dark and spine-tingling with our customary British flair.
Come join the dark side.
If
you dare.